Okay, we were talking about the eastern flying squirrel. It looks like a small gray squirrel if you happen to catch a glimpse of one seated. If you look at it more closely, though, it is very distinctive from this guy, which is the eastern gray squirrel, very common squirrel that we see around campus all the time. Gray squirrels reach a length of maybe 16, 17 inches. They are brownish gray on above. The underside is a grayish white. They feed on acorns, pine cones, and so you can always tell their activity by the chewed husk of the acorns, the gnawed cones of pine trees, and the other things that they feed on. They like hardwood or mixed forest with lots of nut trees. Gray squirrels are particularly active in the morning and evening. They remain active all year. They carry nuts when they find them and store them by burying them in the ground, and about 15% or so of the nuts are never recovered, and as a result they are very instrumental in the spread of nut trees. They'll den in trees. They build leaf nests, or they may den in old woodpecker holes or natural cavities. These, for example, are denning in this natural cavity in a tree, but much more commonly you'll see this sort of big leafy nest, which is the home to a family of gray squirrels. Muskrat are an aquatic rodent, maybe 24 inches long. They might weigh as much as 4 pounds. Very glossy brown fur, which once upon a time, and I guess to a degree still today, was somewhat valuable. They build houses or lodges of aquatic plants, may also burrow in the edges of stream banks. Active usually at night or at dusk and dawn. They're very good swimmers. They actually can chew their plant material underwater. They can stay submerged for as much as 16 to 20 minutes. One that was observed to stay under for 17 minutes came to the surface for 3 seconds and then submerged for another 10 minutes. This is a muskrat in the water. They have a flattened tail, but it's not flattened the same way a beaver's tail is flattened. Beaver's tail is flattened dorsoventrally. Tail of a muskrat is flattened laterally. You can sort of see that in this illustration. They also build a lodge that's similar to a beaver lodge, or they can build these. They don't always build them, but it's much smaller than a beaver lodge. The nutria is an invasive rodent, very large. They can be as much as 4 feet in length. Brown on the top, a little bit paler underneath. Very distinctive incisors. The incisors are bright orange. They were brought into Louisiana in the 1930s, where they escaped from captivity, and they became very widespread in Louisiana, actually became an important part of the trapping industry. And then they, when the fur industry collapsed in the late 1980s, prior to that, some million nutria were captured in Louisiana every year. They've spread pretty much across the southeast, and we're seeing them more and more here. That brings us to the, I think for most people, the most interesting group of mammals, the order Carnivora. These are the flesh eaters, and we often talk about them at the family level, because this includes things like the family Canidae, the dog family, the felids, which are the cats, the ursids, the bear family, even things like the weasel family, the family Mustelidae. All of these very interesting groups of animals, very strongly nocturnal for the most part, but there is a degree of diversity here. There are some mammals that are arboreal. I'm sorry, carnivores that are arboreal. There are a few that are diurnal. There are even some that are largely aquatic. Distinguish if you would, between the order Carnivora, I say the big C carnivore, and the small c carnivore, the adjective carnivorous. Members of the order Carnivora are not always strict carnivores. Many of them are omnivores. They feed on a variety of food materials instead of just flesh. We are beginning to hear more and more reports in Alabama about the return of the American black bear, Ursus americanus. In fact, I saw a web article just yesterday about the increasing number of sightings of black bears in Alabama. You won't mistake black bears for anything else, obviously. They reach a length of perhaps 6 feet, might weigh as much as 300 pounds. Or more. Wonder if this sound file will work. This is, I think, the roar of an American black bear. That's not terribly impressive, but black bears are, they vary actually in color, and this is a good illustration of it, between a sort of a cinnamon brown color to a traditionally to a more black. Many times they have a patch of white under their throat, but not always. Highly arboreal, very good climbers, and this is one carnivore in particular that is actually more omnivorous. They feed on small mammals and fish, but they feed very heavily on plants and berries as well. One of our more distinctive carnivores is Lynx rufus, the common bobcat. They're common statewide, and they're found in a wide variety of habitats, including bottomland hardwood forests, swamps, and well adapted to farmlands. Highly nocturnal. You're not likely to see them out and about in the daytime, although you will occasionally. The breeding peak for bobcats is from December to April, but the young may actually be born anytime during the year. They feed on a variety of both vertebrates and invertebrates. There is some coloration variation. Sometimes it's seasonal with more of a rust-colored variation in the summer, but there is variation from individual to individual as well. You can see how widespread bobcats are across North America. Tracks are fairly distinctive. They are sort of, if you drew a circle around it, it would be pretty much a good circle. The cats have retractable claws, so you typically won't see claw marks on the footprint. Track of a bobcat looks very much like the track of a house cat. It's just typically larger. We won't encounter the mountain lion, Felis concolor. Actually, the Felis and actually that's wrong. And I'm going to go ahead and change it while I'm thinking about it. They used to be Felis concolor, but they're no longer. They're now Puma concolor, which also is one of the many common names that this animal goes by. The one that used to be found in Alabama, and might, I have to agree, might occasionally be found, and I'll explain why in a second, was in fact the Florida panther strain of these, and looks much like this. They are tawny brown. No, they are not black. They grade to a little bit lighter underneath. Very distinctive in appearance. If you see one, you'll know it. But if you've seen a black panther, you were hallucinating or drunk or something. Because there's never been a melanistic specimen observed of Puma concolor. I link here this article on Alabama's native lion, and it makes interesting reading. Now, is it possible that there might be one in the state of Alabama? Many of you have heard me discuss this in other classes, but I'll discuss it here also. The Florida panther, the Puma concolor that was at one time native to Alabama, is now restricted to the southern part of the Florida Peninsula, and they number somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 individuals. They're actually beginning to make a little bit of a comeback down there. And western cougars, you don't start encountering them in any numbers until you get to Texas. However, a few years ago, a gentleman in Georgia shot and killed a panther in western Georgia, and he thought it was an escaped animal. I don't know if he was charged. This is one of the most protected animals in the world. But DNA analysis revealed that it was in fact a Florida panther, which had been identified in South Florida. So it had walked some 600 miles from South Florida to eastern Georgia. Young males will do that. They will, if they can't find a mate in their home range, they will go walkabout, and this one apparently had. There's also been increasing number of sightings of western cougars in Louisiana, and I even read a confirmed report of one that was sighted on the Natchez Trace in western Mississippi. So is it possible that we might eventually start seeing Puma concolor in Alabama? Yes, it is. My personal belief is that if they do repopulate the state, it's more likely to be the western variety spreading east than it is the highly endangered Florida panther spreading north. But we'll just have to wait and see. However, I can assure you that all of your buddies who have sworn to you that they have seen panthers when they're in the woods, they haven't. If they're here, it is a needle in a haystack type sighting. The members of the family Canidae that we have, let's see, we have, I guess, 3 that are fairly common. The red fox, characterized by the rusty red coloration, and the black stockings and the black tip of the foot, fairly common and fairly diurnal. You know, this is a fox that you can actually see in the daytime. Fairly distinctive tracks. They look like small dog tracks. The gray fox is a bit more nocturnal. You'll see these more active at night. Gray fox are an unusual looking fox. They've got the distinctive coloration. They've got a relatively small head. Oddly enough, they actually are good climbers. This is a something that's. There are other members of the dog family that climb as well, but gray fox are unique in our area in terms of a canid that actually is able to climb trees. Also, a very similar type of track. And then, of course, coyotes, which have invaded Alabama over the last few decades, but the coyote looks a great deal like a skinny German shepherd or a skinny wolf. Tawny, grayish brown, although there is some variation in coloration. The track is very similar to a domestic dog, but the tracks of coyotes, I don't particularly like this illustration. The tracks are often in a nearly straight line. This is the best runner of all the canids. They will cruise at nearly 30 miles an hour. They travel tremendous distances, as much as 300 to 400 miles. Highly omnivorous. They'll feed on small mammals and birds, but they also take a lot of fruit. They will go through a watermelon patch in a heartbeat. And they are becoming a bit problematical. We used to have red wolves in Alabama, but not any longer. They're only found now in areas where they are trying to reestablish populations. We have several members of the weasel family. Probably the most noteworthy is Mephistus mephistus, the striped skunk. These are big animals. They'll reach a length counting the tail, of as much as 40 inches. Very distinctive with the two white stripes running down the back. A black and white coloration is what serves at best as warning coloration in mammals, the majority of which are colorblind, at least in the sense that we think of color. Striped skunks are found on forest borders. They like fenced rows. They like open meadows. Highly nocturnal. They feed on mice and rats and chipmunks and a lot of insects. We have the largest population of striped skunks around Livingston that I've ever seen. It's amazing the number of skunks that I see dead on the highway here. Have an interesting behavior where they'll stomp back and forth from one foot to another as a way of a warning behavior to try to avoid having to use their chemical defense. Here are the tracks. They look for all the world like miniature bear tracks, very distinctive, and we'll likely see these in the field. This is when it's time to run, if you see this particular posture. We also have the smaller spotted skunk with the tail. They reach about 22 inches in length. They're about the size of a squirrel. The males are. The females are a little bit smaller. They also have a very interesting warning behavior. They do a handstand where they stand on the front legs and arch the tail over the back. That's a way of warning a potential predator not to fool with them. This is the smallest North American skunk. They live in brushy areas. They also like farms, and they'll commonly take refuge under a farm building if they can. They hunt at night. They feed on insects and the occasional small rodent or lizard. Let me see if this YouTube will work. I don't know how this will work in integrity. I'm going to give it a shot though. It's actually showing on the other monitor. So you might have to do this yourself. We do have weasels. This is the long-tailed weasel. Reddish brown in coloration. Sometimes it's a little bit lighter color. This is fairly typical. See how widespread the long-tailed weasel is across the U.S., but you hardly ever see them. They're so secretive and they are nocturnal. They are very skilled, very aggressive hunters. They will often kill more prey than they can eat. They prey on mice and rats and shrews and things like that. They'll also take on poultry, and of course one of these weasels, they're about 16 inches long. They could never eat a chicken. They might eat a piece of it, but this is an animal that almost sometimes seems to kill simply for the pleasure of killing. They burrow. They actually use the burrows of other animals, and they'll line it with fur and feathers. They fascinating to watch move. They move very quickly, almost difficult to follow sometimes. They move so quickly. The mink, which many people don't realize we have in Alabama, but we do have them in abundance. Mink are an aquatic weasel. You'll always find them close to water. They are also an aggressive hunter. They'll also sometimes kill more than they need. They are particularly fond of muskrat, and they'll destroy an entire muskrat colony. They'll take fish, other mammals as well. The adult female will carry the young around by the scruff of their neck. When they are disturbed, they will emit a noxious smelling musk. Highly nocturnal, highly aquatic. Of course, the fur is quite valuable, but most of the fur that are used in most of the mink that are used in the fur industry now are raised in captivity. They reach about 20 inches in length, and they weigh about 2 pounds. See the distribution here. They are widely dispersed across the eastern U.S. and spreading up into Canada. The tracks, which you might see, but along the edge of a lake margin, for example. And then we have the river otter, which are quite common, widespread across the state. Tremendous swimmers, very playful. We will probably see places where they have been active, whether we see them or not. They'll actually build slides that they will use to play, to slide down into a body of water. They feed primarily on small fish. Pond owners think that otters hurt their pond. They typically don't. They usually are taking trash fish. You can see that this one has a bullhead, and that's usually the case. The fur, again, here is quite valuable, but not as much as it used to be. Otters are a favorite attraction at most zoos because of their playful behavior. And the last of the carnivores that I'll show you is probably the one we're most likely to see. Procyon lotor is the common raccoon, easily identified by the mask and the ringed tail. Highly omnivorous. They eat a lot of fruit, a lot of corn. They, if they're close to the water, they will wash their food. It's probably less related to washing their food than it is to moistening it. They'll typically den in a hollow tree, although they will sometimes take over a squirrel nest or something like that. Very curious, very mischievous. They will, in areas where they've gotten accustomed to human beings, they will drive you absolutely nuts. They'll steal everything in your tent. Again, we've got this distinctive hand-like front foot and the hind foot, which is greatly elongated. Very easy track to recognize. That brings us to the artiodactylans. We have two wild artiodactylans in Alabama. One that's native and one that's feral, meaning it's a domestic animal gone wild. The artiodactylans are the even-toed ungulates. In other words, they are hooved mammals that have 2 or 4 toes. All of ours have 2 toes. In America, there are 2 forms, the pig group and the cow group. That's based on the structure of the teeth and whether they have horns or antlers, and the structure of the stomach and the foot. We have the white-tailed deer, of course, which everybody around here knows about. We will doubtless see white-tailed deer, Odocoileus virginianus. The antlered males, antlers being forked or branched, and deciduous, meaning they're shed at the end of the reproductive season, and typically found only in males, which tells us that it is a secondary sexual characteristic. The adult female is unantlered, and the fawns, born in the early part of the summer, are typically spotted for camouflage. I would assume you've all seen the track of the white-tailed deer. Our other wild hooved animal is the feral pig, Sus scrofa. These are the descendants of domestic stock brought to the southeast years ago, and hogs that escaped or were released have adapted far too well to the wild, and feral swine are actually a major problem in this part of the world right now. So we will almost certainly see feral swine and perhaps see feral pig tracks. In these guys, the dew claws, this 4th toe, is often visible in the track. If it's not, though, the tracks are usually a bit more spread than the tracks of deer. We may be fortunate to see the only member of the order Sirenia native to Alabama. That is the West Indian manatee, which is beginning to make a bit of a comeback and has been showing up in some of the estuaries near Mobile. The West Indian manatee may be as much as 11 or 12 feet long and weigh half a ton. Females typically a little bit larger than males. We would be extremely fortunate to see a manatee, but maybe we'll get lucky when we go south. And I wind up with manatee track, which you should be able to recognize. All right, that's going to wrap up the mammals. I'm going to upload this and move on to something else.